Hi, folks. Steve Urban here, founder and CEO at Riderflex. We hope you enjoy today's podcast. And as a reminder, please subscribe to the Riderflex show for updates on new episodes. And by the way, if you haven't already, check out the book we recently launched, The Riderflex Guide, Inspiring and Hiring, available for purchase on Amazon. And now, a quick word from our sponsor.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Joe O'Connor on the Riderflex podcast. Welcome, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing good, Steve. How about you?
I'm doing fine. Love that Irish accent, my friend. Love it. Although it's a little watered down a little bit. It's not as strong as some people I talk to that grew up. I'm assuming you grew up over there. I know you went to college over there, but did you grow up there too?
I did. Yeah. I'm only living in this part of the world, initially in New York, now in Toronto for just over a year now, a year and 2 months. And it worries me that you've said that, because actually I was at home for a wedding earlier this year, and one of my best friends played a playback of me doing another podcast where he was claiming that I've now managed to get myself an American accent. So you could have got me in trouble with that introduction.
I just saw a video clip of 4 women from different parts of Ireland, right? And they, whatever, north, south, east, west, whatever. I can't remember the regions they were talking about, but they were dissecting each other's accents and how a little bit different depending on what part you come from. Is that accurate?
Oh, it is. I mean, I probably have, where I'm from in Ireland, I'm from the Midwest of Ireland. It probably is a more neutral accent than Dublin or Cork or Belfast. So it maybe isn't as immediately recognizable, especially if you're not from Ireland. But yeah, there's a huge change in the dialects for sure.
What's it? We won't spend an hour on Ireland, but I'm curious about a couple of things. And I know probably most Americans are too, that don't know the history. What do the Irish think of Americans just in general? Like if you're just at a pub and you're like, what do you think of Americans? If I just asked 10 random dudes at a pub, what would they say?
So if I'm being honest, the kind of the tone has probably shifted in the post-Trump era, and that might not surprise you, but in terms of, international outlook on the American polity, there maybe is a little bit more of a negative undertone to that than there would have been, let's say, 10 years ago or when I was growing up. I think, I think in the world that I'm in, I remember when I was moving to New York originally and was obviously taking up this role, advocating for and supporting companies to move to shorter work weeks. There was definitely a lot of people that were saying to me, you're basically moving to the capital of overwork to try and convince them to work shorter hours. So,
True.
So definitely that's a perception that's out there as well.
Okay. All right. So that's true then in Europe in general. Is it? I've heard that, but I'm not an expert on it. I mean, I know there's more weeks of vacation. I think the benefits are better, but generally, is it more work-life balance in Ireland? People are like, hey, look, I'm going to get my time off. I'm going to spend time with family. I'm not going to work 80 hours a week. Is that the mentality? That truly is the mentality?
I think when it comes to things like vacations and maternity leave and stuff like that, it is generally more favorable in Europe vis-a-vis the States. And certainly in Ireland, as you probably know, we have quite a lot of US multinationals that are based there. And there probably is some kind of the growth of the US multinational sector in Ireland. Some people would attribute the kind of growth of this always on work culture to the, to the prevailing culture that US multinationals would have brought to certain industries in Ireland. So that would be my experience.
Is it different in Northern Ireland? Is it a whole different mentality there, or no? Pretty much the same.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to make a good stab at it, given that, I haven't spent a huge amount of time in Northern Ireland. I didn't grow up there. But I would imagine it's not hugely different.
Okay. Yeah, just curious. I was vacationing in Cancun one time, and my wife and I were at the pool having a having some drinks, and there was an Irish couple there, and we struck up a conversation, and I found it fascinating, just how he was talking about how he's like, he's like, the healthcare, it's free healthcare, or, I guess, I don't know if free is the right word, but universal healthcare and more vacations and this and that. And he was asking me questions about what it's like to be in America and, our style and different things and culture. And it was a fascinating conversation to hear him talk about what his thoughts were about U.S. citizens. And Trump had just won the election. And so he goes, about Trump. I go, what do you think? It was so good. It was a great conversation. Really nice couple, by the way. Great couple. And he, overall, I guess my point is, he had pluses and minuses. He had good things he loved about it, and he had things he didn't like about it, which I guess is the same in the U.S., right? I mean, maybe it's that way for every country, right? There's
For
probably
sure.
no.
I mean, I'm someone that wanted to come and live in the States for a period of my life and have visited very regularly. I am probably in a very, very small minority, although it's a growing minority of Irish people that is obsessed with US sports. I became a Buffalo Bills fan when I was about 12 years of age. And there was something that really drew me in about, aspects of American sports, American culture. Most of my favorite bands are from the States. So certainly, it's a mix of good and bad, as it is with, I think, most countries, most cultures, most societies.
Yeah. Your folks are still there? All your family still in Ireland?
Being honest, I have an uncle and his family who are based in Kildare in Ireland. I have another side of my family that's in Longford. I've got another uncle that's close to me who lives in London. I'm an only child, and both of my parents passed away, one of them in 2017 and one of them shortly after in 2018. So my family home, which is in the west of Ireland in Roscommon, right now is unoccupied. We go back there and we visit for Christmas and for holidays. But unfortunately, I don't have the same family roots there that I might have done 5 or 6 years ago.
But you kept the place. So the place is empty and you go back for the holidays, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we haven't decided we've emigrated yet. We're still going back. It's great to have the place there for visits, to have that community there. And also, we're kind of leaving the door open to come back at some point.
And is that a family? Are you married, kids, partner? What's the status there?
So I have a partner and we have 2 Cocker Spaniels. So that's the equivalent of our kids. We brought them over from Ireland to the US last year. So her name is Grace, and she's actually working with me on this initiative that I'm involved in. And then we have 2 Cocker Spaniels, Ned and Lady.
And how did you meet Grace?
We actually met. We knew each other for quite some time, or knew of each other at least, on the basis that she was a public representative, was a local councillor for the Labour Party in Ireland. I had been working for a number of years in the trade union movement. I was the head of campaigns for Ireland's largest public sector union. So we kind of floated in the same circles to some extent. And it was actually at the beginning of the pandemic that we set up a not-for-profit initiative together to support small Irish businesses who had no online presence, to kind of get them up and running and trading online. We did that as a kind of a voluntary initiative early in the pandemic. And, I guess the rest is history.
Is the Labour Party the equivalent of the Democratic Party in the U.S. for the listeners? Can you educate them on that?
The Irish political system is quite different to the US and even to the UK, where people might be familiar with the Labour Party in the UK, in that it's much more multi-party. It's not a kind of a two-person or a two-party system. You've got Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, Labour, Social Democrats, the Green Party, all of which have been in and around government formation possibilities over the years. So it's a slightly different structure. So as a result, the Labour Party would be, it was bigger. They got into government, lost a lot of seats, but they would be a much smaller entity than, let's say, the British Labour Party or the Democratic Party in the US.
I see. Interesting. Well, I wish we had more than 2 choices here when we voted for president. That'd be nice.
I'm not even going to get into that.
No comment. Okay. Were you a good kid, bad kid? Were you a rebel? Were you straight A student? Were you, altar boy? What were you like growing up?
Um, I think when I was in what we would call primary school, which I think is like your high school. So kind of when I was much younger, I was probably closer to altar boy. I was probably a lot more quiet, a lot more reserved, a lot more, smaller circle of friends. I would have been probably considered a bit of a nerd, a little bit geeky at school. So I think it was probably when I got to secondary school, maybe towards the end of secondary school, that my rebellious phase probably started.
Is that high school in the U.S. secondary school? I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe it is high school. So let's say primary school is kind of up to the age of maybe, 12, 13, and then 12, 13 to the age of, I was 17 when I went to college, would be secondary school. So yeah, I think I was probably altar boy and then rebel, and then probably found a good balance somewhere in between towards the end of my time in college.
Can college kids in Ireland drink more than U.S. college kids? I don't know. I've always heard that the Irish can drink pretty good.
Well, without having a good handle on the volume that US college kids drink, I would say that they would have their work cut out for them to compete with us, there's definitely kind of a running joke, when you see even like US movies with like frat parties and stuff like that, someone's had, 3 bottles of Budweiser and now they're absolutely crazy drunk and they're a big hero, and kind of Irish people would be looking at that saying, I'd have that done as a kind of a warm up,
That's pretty funny. That's pretty good. By the way, before we get into career stuff, I got to tell you this. For a long time, I've been married to Kim for 22 years. For a long time, she thought she was Irish. It's a long story. She didn't really know her history too well and didn't know who her father was, different things. Anyway, but she thought she was Irish. So, every St. Patrick's Day, we're putting stuff out. She always tells everybody she's Irish, this whole thing for years and years and years. We found her real dad, and she made a connection with him. He was almost 90 by the time she found him. And we go down to meet him. He's down in Texas, and we go down to meet him. And she says something about being Irish. And he's like, huh? He's like, what are you talking about? He goes, we're English. It's Shropshire. She's like, you're not Irish. And see, my wife was for weeks. She's like, I can't believe I'm not Irish.
That must have been a blow.
It was a blow.
I'm glad she was so disappointed about it. That kind of says something,
She was. Yeah, she was. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I appreciate you sharing some of that history. Thank you very much. Let's talk about your career a little bit before we get into 4-day work weeks and things like that. Did you know what you wanted to be coming out of school? Was there a plan? Talk to me, roll me through your career a little bit.
Sure. I don't think that I did. I studied in accountancy, didn't love it, did enough to be able to kind of get a pretty good degree and to be able to say I have some kind of a background in finance. So I'm kind of literate in the world of numbers. I went on to do a master's in business strategy and innovation, which I liked much more. But I ended up spending a number of years then in the student movement. So I was elected as Students' Union president while I was in Galway in college. And then I ended up becoming the national president of our Students' Union back in 2013. I think that was the thing that really, I was always kind of politically and socially interested, but I think that was certainly the period in my life that probably focused me on, I want to do something that's much more about changing things and disrupting things than maybe my trajectory had been leading before that. It opened my eyes to a lot of stuff and made me probably a much more socially aware version of myself than was the case before I started in the student movement.
Okay, very good. So those leadership skills, did those come from mom, dad? Where both? Where did that seed get planted to step into a leadership role, you think?
It's a good question. I honestly don't know the answer. I had a hugely supportive upbringing. My dad was an incredibly hard worker. My mom was a social worker. My dad used to manage a seafood company. He would have done a lot of driving. So, when I went to college, I was on a student grant. We weren't particularly well off family. And I probably, in the early stages of college, took that a little bit for granted, had my rebellious phase, but kind of righted the ship and got things right before the end. I'm not sure. I would say that probably values around, working hard, respect, trust, I think they're all things that very much came from my family upbringing. But the kind of, the business leadership and the kind of political interest stuff, I'm not sure that was where it originated.
This may be a very granular question, but I'm curious, was there a moment in college where somebody approached you, or you were with some friends, or maybe somebody else was already in student government or a leadership role, and they nudged you and they said, Joe, hey, why don't you come to this meeting? Joe, hey, Joe, you should, you have the right skills for this. You got the right people skills. Why don't you come over here and run for this or run for that? The reason I'm asking you that question is because that is what happened to me. I wouldn't call myself a huge leader in high school, but when I got to college, I was living in the dorms, and a guy nudged me one day. He's like, "Hey, man," he goes, "you need to come to the student government meeting." I was like, "Okay, I guess." And the next thing I know, I'm like student body vice president. But I got nudged and pushed in that direction by some people, and I was blessed for it. How about you? Was there a moment that you remembered kind of maneuvering in that direction?
I think that there was a big element of luck, if I'm being honest, in that what ended up happening with me was somebody that I knew at the time, not particularly well, but ended up becoming good friends with, was over in my student apartment, speaking to a housemate of mine, and they were running for student union vice president. And that conversation kind of led to me putting my hat in the ring, almost as a thing of, this will be fun, And I was a really late entrant to the race. I had done no preparation. I had no campaign team. I effectively was a non-runner in that race, but I did the big speech and the hustings that were held. I think I did pretty well. And that 2-week period of that campaign told me two things. First of all, I'm really interested in this stuff, and I think I'd be pretty good at it. But secondly, I was so inspired by the fact that my group of friends and my community of people that were around me and that were supporting me, like, they probably knew I was a bit of a no-hoper, but yet they gave up their time. They were willing to kind of back me regardless of whether I was going to be the winning horse or not. And that really motivated me to say, okay, I'm going to come back next year and I'm going to do this right, and I'm going to do this properly, and I'm going to win. And that's what I did.
Awesome. Okay, very good. Talk to me. I originally reached out to you because I saw that you were CEO of 4-Day Week Global, I guess is the accurate name. I think it's a nonprofit, right? I reached out to you because I'm curious about that topic. I after working 70 hours a week for most of my life, killing myself, making it to, I ran a couple of $40 million companies as an executive before I started Riderflex. I abused time with my family because, and so anyway, the point is, once I got to about 50 and I started Riderflex, I really began to concentrate on work-life balance. I began to concentrate on spending time with my wife, spending time on my health, spending time on my hobbies, which I never did before. I mean, when I was in my 20s and 30s and early 40s, all I did was work. But I have really focused on that the last 5 or 6, 7 years, and I'm so much happier for it, and just psychologically, physically, and I do think we overwork ourselves as Americans in general. And so anyway, when I saw your profile, I thought, man, I'd like to interview Joe because I'm really interested in this topic. First of all, I guess maybe tell me, why did you go to 4-Day Week Global? Why did you leave? And then you can roll that into what you're doing now. That's a big question, but go ahead.
Sure. Sounds good. First of all, I just want to say the story you just told about your own career and where you started out and your journey and where you got to is actually really common in the 4-day week world. I mean, we are still at this kind of early adapter phase of companies and leaders who are doing this. And, a huge amount of leaders that are attracted to this come from a background of having been the kind of people that work themselves to the bone and maybe burnt out at some point themselves in the past. And they've become enlightened to that. And now they want to create a different environment in their workplace for the future. So that is quite a common story that we come across. So in terms of the shorter work week, this is something that back in my previous role in Ireland, I first became interested in back in 2018. We had done a survey of public sector workers in Ireland, asking them questions around work-life balance issues, their attitude towards work time reduction. This is a conversation that was starting to percolate a little bit internationally. There had been some trials in Sweden and in New Zealand. And what really struck me by the response to that was the huge volume of working parents, predominantly women, who had responded to that, telling a story about how they had already reduced their work time because of maternity leave, returning from maternity leave, work-life balance reasons, childcare reasons. And what so many of them were saying was that, first of all, that effectively the expectations that they had in their job, working 4 days a week or working 32 hours a week, but getting paid 80% of the salary, their expectations were the same. Their output was the same. Their responsibilities in the role was the same. So that told me a couple of things. It told me, number one, we have a gender equality problem in the workplace that I think a universalized shorter work week could really help to address. But also, secondly, this concept of Parkinson's law really holds true. This idea that a task will expand to fill the time that's available for its completion. So that kind of inspired me to look into this subject more. I organized a major international conference on the future of working time at the end of 2018 in Dublin. In 2019, I formed the 4-day week Ireland coalition and was the chairperson of that group for the first couple of years of its existence. And then last year in 2021, we designed the first ever 4-day week pilot program and research project in Ireland, which was really about providing training, mentoring, access to networking, and research assessment to companies who are interested in trialing the shorter work week.
I see. Okay. All right.
And then next, I was coming to New York last September as a visiting research fellow with Cornell University to lead a research project on work time reduction. This is kind of something being honest, I was doing it because I had never got the opportunity to travel. I always wanted to live or to work outside of Ireland, at least for a period of my life, because of the trajectory of college, students' union, career. It just never happened for me. And the stars kind of aligned in that 4-day week global, which is a not-for-profit based out in New Zealand and set up by two entrepreneurs that had introduced this in their own company a number of years ago. I knew them for a number of years. We'd been collaborating, and they said, look, we want to run a similar pilot program in the US. We want to take that kind of structure that you've created in Ireland and bring it global. So that's what I've been doing over the last year.
And it's a nonprofit though, right? Is it funded through cash raising, or how do you stay alive financially?
So when I started with the organization, this was really something that was a project of love from the two founders who really believed in this idea, saw the benefits that it had for their business. So, really the only income the organization had at that point was sales of Andrew, one of our co-founders' book. By the time I left, we had put in place a structure whereby companies that were participating in our pilot programs would pay a contribution based on the number of employees that they had in the organization taking part in the trials. So that really got us to a space where, we were able to sustain our overheads and also grow the organization during the time that I was there.
Okay, let me repeat what you just said, because I want to make sure I understand. So if let's use my own firm, Riderflex, a recruiting firm. If I wanted to implement a 4-day work week, but I just needed some guidance and training and strategy, et cetera, I could call 4-day week global in New York and say, I need help. And you would say, yeah, that's cool. We'll help you. We're a nonprofit, so you can't really pay us. But if you want to make a contribution, we're happy to help you. Is that accurate?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a case where, obviously everything that we were earning was being reinvested into the organization, into achieving its goals, into its research objectives. But, it was a payment for service effectively.
Okay.
So,
okay. Was the goal, I mean, I know the short-term goal was to help companies transition to make life better for people, but was there a longer-term goal to eventually get legislation passed to force companies to go 4-day work week, or the vision wasn't that far out?
Well, I mean, I think the use of the term forced is really what we were trying to avoid, because if you look at the trajectory of the 5-day working week and the 8-hour day back a century ago, this is something that it didn't start with legislation. Legislation was introduced after this concept was popularized internationally. It didn't happen everywhere all at once. It didn't happen in every industry. It didn't happen in every country all at the same time. This was a slow, gradual transition brought about by business pioneers like Henry Ford in the manufacturing sector, brought about by civil society campaigners and labor unions bargaining for this. So we were very much approaching this as, yes, our long-term goal was in that organization, and is for me personally, and in the new endeavors that I'm undertaking, is about moving to a space where the shorter work week becomes the new normal all over the world. But our view was very much that this is something that needs to happen in a way that isn't imposed on business, but actually partners with business to support them to make this transition in a way that's better for everyone, where workers see the benefit, but also businesses see the benefit of more focused, motivated, refreshed, productive workers, and also the really significant competitive edge that organizations that have done this have gained in terms of recruitment and retention.
What do you say to the business owner that is super old school, CEO, founder? They're like, what are you talking about, man? Like, if you take away 1 day a week, now all of a sudden I'm producing, instead of producing 10,000 mugs, now I can only produce 9,000 mugs next week because you took a day away from me, blah, blah, blah. How do you respond?
Well, I think that most of us would agree that in 2022, it isn't such a simple thing as 1 hour's work equals 1 hour productivity. And everything that we were doing was based on this concept of the 180-100 rule, which is trademarked by 4-day week global. And it's about 100% of the pay, 80% of the time, but in exchange for a commitment to delivering 100% of the output. So this was very much about how can you deliver the same results in less time using fewer or more efficient inputs. And, we all know that not all priorities are created equal. Not all work tasks are created equal. So this really creates an environment in a business which incentivizes people because of the transformative benefit that actually this extra time means for people in their lives, whether it's extra time with family, for caring with their kids, to pursue new skills and new hobbies. You create this environment where the company's interests in terms of its objectives and its targets and its metrics are aligned with the individual interests of workers. They're really, they are innovating and making changes to how they work, the way they work, their work practices, in order to make sure that this is something that is sustainable for the business.
Instead of calling it 4-day work week, why not just say, hey, look, I'm going to pay you $100,000. Here's what I need accomplished on a regular basis. I don't care when you work. I don't care what your schedule is. I don't care where you work from. I don't care what your shifts are. You want to work on Saturdays and Sundays and take Mondays, Tuesdays off. I don't give a shit. Just produce X, Y, and Z for $100,000. How about that?
I mean, effectively, what we're talking about is not a different thing. It's just the structure under which it exists. So, for example, the reality is that while we are talking about making time, time should not be the determinant. Results or productivity should be the determinant. But the reality is we live within a world where people are contracted to work a certain number of hours, a certain number of days. So if you don't kind of create that tension within a business which forces change and forces efficiency and forces unlocked potential to be unearthed, then it becomes difficult to address things like, overlong or unnecessary meetings, distractions and interruptions in the workday, improving processes, making better use of technology. These are all the things that we've seen companies that have moved to a shorter work week address. And they've done that because they've made time the scarce resource.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I love it all, man. I'm a huge fan. And by the way, what I described is exactly how I run recruiting from Riderflex. I mean, we don't have an office. We're all 100% remote. And I generally just say, hey, look, this is the job I need you to do. Yeah, we have a couple of scheduled meetings on certain days, but I really don't care. I've never called any of my people and said, why aren't you at your desk? So I'm a huge fan, which is one of the reasons I wanted to interview you and have you on the Riderflex podcast. All right, tell me what happened. So this all sounds great. You're not at 4-Day Week Global now. Can you share anything about why you left there and what you're doing now?
Well, I think that the shorter work week movement is growing in the sense that it's going to require a lot of different interventions in order for this to become what I described earlier, the new normal. And I think that the work that we've been doing at 4-Day Week Global in terms of coordinating these global trials has really made a difference in terms of building momentum behind the shorter work week, achieving social proof, and building the research base and the evidence base, which I think has moved the conversation on from 3 or 4 years ago when I talked about this subject. A lot of people would say that's a pie in the sky fantasy idea. I don't think that is the conversation now. I think there's enough evidence out there to show that this can work for a lot of different businesses. Mm-hmm. And the conversation has now moved on to, can it work for my business, given my own context, my own constraints? So very much what I felt, if we want to take this the next level, recruiting the next couple of hundred companies to go through a trial and to make this work won't have the same level of impact in moving the needle as recruiting the first couple of hundred companies. And to me, the things that will really, take us to the next level again is, can we move those bigger companies who are more complex? So you take, for example, professional services and accountancy. If you could get one of the big four firms to move, and we know they've all been experimenting with this idea, they've been looking at this idea, then that would have huge ripple effects throughout that industry. So one of the things that I'm hoping that this new venture that I'm undertaking will achieve is it will give us the kind of infrastructure to support those larger organizations who require much more bespoke, specialized support than maybe some of the smaller firms taking part in the global trials we had been running, to actually make that change.
Does Curium Solutions, where you're at now, are they doing the same things then technically that 4-Day Week Global was is it the same mission?
No, Curium, who we've partnered with to kind of set up this new Center of Excellence for Work Time Reduction, a lot of their work has been very much operational excellence stuff. So it's been working with companies to help them to find that kind of 15-20% of inefficiency that might be there within their business. And for that reason, one of the things that we had been finding at 4-Day Week is what we were doing was very specialized. The 4-Day Week was a conversation starter that got us in the room and got us having those conversations with leaders across very many different companies. But the reality was that, if you spoke to 10 people, maybe only one of them was ready for a full-blown 4-Day week transition right away. And so with the other 9 out of 10, what we were effectively saying to them was, come back to us when or if you're ready. Whereas I think that what I'm hoping that this new partnership can achieve is to actually support all of those companies to get a little bit closer, whether that's 9-day fortnight, half-day Fridays, slightly reduced work days, whether that's an operational excellence project that might mean they can look at a 4-day week 12 months down the line. So it's kind of, broadening that conversation around work time reduction and really trying to work with those bigger organizations to help them make the switch where it is much more complex.
When you say partnership, I want to understand the business setup here. So Work Time Reduction Center of Excellence, is that your company now that's partnered with Curium? Well, I want to understand the structure.
Yeah, that's right. So I've partnered with Curium, and it's really trying to bring together the experience I have in designing and implementing these shorter work week trials all over the world with the stuff that they've been doing very much in the operational excellence space, which gives us the kind of resource and capacity where we can do 9 or 10 of these bigger projects all at once rather than 1 or 2, which might have been the case previously.
I see. And for this partnership, to get this partnership going, that's why you had to move to Toronto, because that's where Curium is based.
Funnily enough, Curium are based in the US and the UK. So we're setting up a new business here in Canada, which is this Center of Excellence for Work Time Reduction. We had actually made the personal decision to move here prior to any of this, coming about. So there's a little bit of serendipity involved there,
All right. Why? Yeah.
Why move to Canada?
Yeah.
Honestly, as I said to you earlier, when we moved to New York, it was kind of a 1-year thing. We didn't head for the airport saying we're leaving Ireland, we're emigrating. We're planning to stay for a year and come home. Sometime during the summer, we kind of decided, you know what, we're not ready to move home quite yet. There was lots of things that we really loved about living in New York, the sports for me, the arts, the culture, the theater for Grace. But we're also kind of hoping to settle down and start a family soon. And, we had, I guess the healthcare and the quality of life offering here maybe felt a little bit closer to, to home, maybe felt a little bit more closer to what, as a European, you would expect as a safety net. So yeah, we kind of thought maybe this is a good halfway house. Maybe this gives us the balance of some of the things we loved about living in the States, but with a little bit about what we miss from home.
I appreciate you giving the story on that. Thank you. For the listeners, what websites do you want to direct them to? Work Time Reduction Center of Excellence. What's the URL or the website for that?
So it's going to be worktimereduction.com, and we're actually launching it next Tuesday. Is going to be the official launch of this new initiative. So we're having this conversation really as we're building this and really getting it off the ground.
And then Curium Solutions is curiumsolutions.com, I guess. Okay, very good. Are you the sole owner? Is it you and Grace that own the LLC or whatever for your company? Are you the sole owner, or is there partners? Are there investors?
It's a joint venture between me and Curium.
Okay, very good. All right. Thank you for all of that. I think what you're doing is important. And I'm a huge fan. I feel like I'm kind of already doing it at Riderflex to a certain degree. I mean, I haven't said to the team it's a 4-day work week and we're officially closed on Friday, but shit, I think most of my team, I don't think they do much on Friday already anyway, because so I'm almost there. So I'm a huge fan. Are you ever going to run? You strike me as the type of guy that would run for office someday. You feel like a very social, political guy. Like you have very strong beliefs. I think that you would tell me about if we were having beers and we weren't recording. I feel that from you.
For sure. Who said I wouldn't do it while we're recording?
Are you do you have any aspirations for political positions of any kind? Because I feel that on you.
Honestly, if you had asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have said that I feel it's inevitable that at some point, I would like to enter that world. Whether that's, being the elected official or at least working in that space. I'm probably further away from that now than I've ever been. I think that sometimes life just takes you in a different path. I feel the kind of work I'm doing now is making the kind of change and the kind of impact that probably, having some familiarity with the constraints and the confines of the political system, I might find very difficult to replicate in that world. I get a buzz from this work in a way that, I don't feel the need that running for elected office will kind of will do something for me that I currently don't have. So yeah, I mean, I probably would have said that there's probably like 10 people in the world that might end up running for political office, and circumstance might mean that only one of them ends up doing it. And I feel I might be in the 9.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not living in Ireland anymore, and I'm doing something that I love, and that, you know, I don't really see myself wanting to give up anytime soon.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another question here, and this one you may not want to answer because it's a little more sticky, or a little more tricky, I guess is the right word. What do you think about the current U.S. Political environment here? What are your thoughts? Do you feel like the country is continuing to move towards, I don't know, we'll call it more socialist type thoughts, socialism, hard to the left a little bit? Does it feel that way to you? Is that what you sense, that it's moving in that direction, stronger and stronger?
It doesn't feel that way to me. I would say that the biggest concern that I would have, as, you know, an outsider looking in, firstly, and as somebody who kind of, you know, who sat watching the footage from the January insurrection on television, that there is this undercurrent of division, instability, and uncertainty that I certainly feel is there, and is worrying, I think, not just for the United States, but globally, because of the position that the United States holds within global political discourse. You know, a lot of the stuff that you would describe as socialist, or that, you know, is kind of discussed as being socialist within your U.S. political discussion, is kind of mainstream in Europe. You know,
I know, right? Yeah, that's one of the reasons I asked you the question. Yep.
So certainly, I think, you know, if you take Bernie Sanders, for example, I think as a politician and as a character in terms of his rhetoric and the way he discusses issues, I think he feels quite socialist, vis-a-vis, you know, mainstream politics here in the US. And that might well be the case. But if you look at, you know, his policy platform around things like universal healthcare, that's the kind of thing which you hear people saying it's socialist in the US, but it's kind of, I mean, even Britain, who's probably one of the least socialist countries in Europe, has universal healthcare. So I mean, I'm not sure that that's the problem. I think part of it is the two-party, you know, situation. I think part of it is, you know, the kinds of divisive figures that have been allowed to kind of, you know, become front and center of the political system, who are really interested in kind of pulling people apart rather than bringing them together.
Do you blame social media, some of the social media outlets, for this division? Do you look at Twitter and Facebook and I don't know who else we want to throw in there, but do you look at these people and go, man, you guys are making these people fight even more? Do you sense that? Yeah,
I think it's a combination of, yes, have there been failings in terms of content moderation, in terms of, you know, how those platforms have you know, have put information out there into the world during election campaigns. Yes, I do think that there's liability there, but I also think that there's an element of this that is just us grappling with what social media means for debate. You know, the reality is that we're all affected by this. So, like, as you can tell, I have my own views, and every time I go on social media, if I go on social media for 2 hours, I'm probably spending 1 hour, 58 or 59 minutes of that having my own views reinforced back at me because of the kinds of people that I follow. So, you know, when you already have views that are somewhat on the fringe of mainstream political discourse, you know, whereas before those views might have been, you know, fringe to the debate, social media has played a role in just magnifying those and putting those really front and center in a way that becomes quite damaging. And I think that's what we're seeing play out now, you know?
I couldn't agree more. I think it's so dangerous for people to see their feed, and their feed is just giving them what they believe and what they think, and it's just reinforcing them, and they never see the other side. So then when they put their phone down and they go down to the bar and they visit with real human beings, they're like, oh shit, okay, actually people do think differently.
Right.
You know, I could ask you a bunch of more questions on this topic, but yeah, I wanted to get your political thoughts there. One more thing. I know we're almost out of time. Do the Irish, do they see us as like wild cat, like cowboys, like everybody's got a gun and blah blah blah? Is that is that how we're viewed,
I mean,
Americans?
no more than you folks think that we're leprechauns chasing a pot of gold down the rainbow. No more than that.
It's so funny. By the way, speaking of handguns, there's an interesting topic we could do a whole episode on. Didn't Trudeau just outlaw the sale of handguns or something like that in Canada? I don't know what he did. Something about the licensing and sale of handguns in Canada or something. I'm misquoting what really happened, but I saw something on that and I thought, wow, if they try to take handguns away from Americans, it might be it might get messy.
Yeah. Again, I'm probably showing. I seen that it came up on my feed because I kind of start getting Canadian stuff now that I live here, and so I did spot that without really looking into it in any detail. But yeah, I mean, that's something which is such a hot button issue in the US, and it's such it really is. I'm not going to say it's split down the middle, but there is.
Yeah, I think so.
It might be, but there is certainly two schools of thought which are equally vociferous in their views. Yeah. I mean, that would be like the views that one side of that debate hold in America would be like a fringe 1% that wouldn't even they would get laughed out of town in Ireland or in most of Europe.
That is fascinating. That's like fascinating.
The idea that, that this is and look, there's lots of historical, political, cultural reasons for this, but the idea that this is something that's like a God-given right that almost having a political and policy discussion about what's the right thing to do, falls underneath, like you see it on Twitter, like you see debates, like it is frightening if you read down, people who are saying we need gun control, and literally you could have 10 people in the feed saying, you come and take it off me.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's crazy, man. It's frightening. I feel like almost every topic in the United States is split down the middle. It seems to me that no matter what we're debating as U.S. citizens, you name it, abortion, whatever, it's like always split down the middle. Rarely in this country do we talk about something where it's like 80% on one side and 20% on the other. It's like we just love to fight about stuff. I don't know. By the way, one last thing, the percentage of people in Ireland that own a gun is like what, like 1%? That's like totally rare.
I mean, it is. I wouldn't be able to answer that question because the idea of gun ownership as even an issue is like, unless somebody was like, hunting, or they happen to have like their grandfather's, novelty weapon in there. Like the idea of this even being something that is worth fighting about is just so far away from normality or reality,
When you run for office, my friend, I got to have you back on, because we could talk about, I could get you on for an hour. We could talk about social and political topics, man. Holy cow. Yeah. I feel you headed that way. I don't know what's the future is for you necessarily, but I love what you're doing on the movement, the work-life balance, the 4-day work week. I mean, what you're doing is important. And I know as a 55-year-old that basically almost killed myself through most of my career and didn't spend the proper time with my children when they were at home. And I really regret that. I think what you're doing is important, and I'm a huge supporter. So keep going, keep pushing it as much as you can. And I'm happy to help promote it on the Riderflex podcast as much as possible, because I'm a fan. I rarely these days do I work on Friday. I'm usually in the Colorado mountains hiking or doing whatever, so I'm a fan, my friend.
Sounds good. Colorado is on my wish list of places I want to get to in this side of the world. So
when you come, we'll have a pint together.
Sounds good to me.